Yeah, so Chad Whitacre, right, head of open source at Sentry. Two big initiatives that we launched last year that may have crossed your radar. One is Fair Source, and the other is Open Source Pledge. Open Source Pledge is something that hopefully we'll get to talk about. It'll be relevant to this talk. But yeah, this talk is about open source as a gift economy and what that might mean. And my main takeaway for you is I propose that open source is a gift economy, but it's just a really bad one. It's a really disorganized gift economy. And it would be in all of our collective best interest to get organized and to do the hard work of turning open source into a properly functioning gift economy. So we're going to spend a few minutes here talking about economy in general and what a gift economy is, compared to other kinds of economy, and then we'll get into applying that to open source and see where we go. See how convinced you are in 13 minutes and 22 seconds. Okay. Okay, so think about economy just generally as kind of a system for exchange between parties, okay? So I'm gonna go over here to my prop at this point. This is the ASMR portion of the... Are I coming across? Okay. So this bag of M&Ms, I bought at the train station the other day, and the exchange went something like this. I pulled this resource, this item off of a shelf. And, well, excuse me, I'm spitting in the microphone. Did I get on camera? And I walked up to a robot, and I showed the robot the bag of M&Ms. And then I showed the robot my phone, and the robot beeped happily, and I went on my way. And at the end of that exchange between me and the robot, the main point here is, that robot and I have nothing to do with each other after that exchange. It was a clean transaction, okay? So I gave it some money, it gave me the M&Ms, and we're done. So we call that's a market transaction, okay? Want to contrast that with a transaction and exchange in a gift economy, and this is the main point about a gift economy. Later that night, let's put these down. Later that night, I went out to dinner with a friend, and at the end of the meal, we were presented with a check, and we both pulled our phones out, right? Right, to see who gets to pay. Thank you, yeah. Right? Who's going to get to pay for it? And I let my friend pay for the meal, and then what did I say after the end of that? I said, I'll get it next time, exactly, thank you, right? So I walked away from that exchange. Obviously there's the exchange with the restaurant. Setting that aside, the exchange between me and my friend is the one I want to focus on here. I walked away from that exchange of receiving the gift of the meal from my friend. I walked away with what? With an obligation, okay? So that gift, and this is the essence of kind of the classic definition of gift economy, is it's a system of exchange based on gifts that carry the obligation to reciprocate or to return the gift at some point in the future. So you're always kind of entangled and enmeshed in this system of relationship and gift giving back and forth, okay? And you can see how that's very different from a market economy. So market transaction, neat and tidy, clean, and for the more engineering minded in the room, scales really well, okay? A gift economy where you've got this really messy interaction, has other potentially beneficial attributes, but doesn't scale nearly as well. So the economy that most of us experience most of the time, the systems of exchange that we participate in is primarily this market transactional economy, but then gift economy sort of lingers in things like a shared meal together and those kinds of things, okay? So that's economy in general, market economy, gift economy. So now let's get to open source. And again, my pitch is open source is a gift economy, it's just a really bad disorganized gift economy. Open source is definitely not, whether or not it's a gift economy, open source is definitely not a market economy, okay? Whether you look at the 4 freedoms, whether you look at the open source definition, it's a free gift, right? There's no, it's permissionless sharing that's encoded into our open source licenses. And that's essential to the nature of open source, is it's this permissionless sharing. To have a market economy with transactions, you need scarcity. The robot won't let me take the thing until I give it the money, right? And it can kind of hold on to that. But the whole point of open source is, we open our arms and we say, here, take this code. That's the point of our open source licenses. Okay, so whether or not it's a gift economy, it's definitely not a market economy. Everybody buy that? How am I doing so far? Okay. All right, so is it a gift economy? Does anybody think it's not a gift economy? Does anybody want to fight me on that one? Serkan, you don't think it's a gift economy? Not even a disorganized one? Okay. So when I produce open source software, you don't think there's a sense of gift when I offer that, when I put it up on GitHub and I offer it to the world?
The problem starts that open source software, they are an alternative to proprietary solutions.
Okay.
Proprietary solutions have a market value.
Okay. What's the market value of open source? And I'll repeat this. Yeah, okay. So Serkan is saying that the problem is that when you contrast open source with proprietary has a market value. And so how do you think about the value of open source? And so there I'd say that's kind of part of the nature of a gift economy is, it's outside of that market. It's outside of that pricing mechanism. So, one big question is, what would the price be, right? And we can talk about that. But I guess in the interest of time, the idea that I want to put out, the model that I want to use is, when I publish software in an open source context, I'm offering a gift to the world, okay? I didn't have to share it. I could have kept it to myself, but I didn't. I published it. And that publishing, let's think about that as a gift that the producer of the software is giving to whom? To the consumers of the software. So let's just think simply about producers of open source and consumers of open source as the two parties in this exchange, okay? All right, so let's take it that open source has this gift element, but then, again, the essence of a gift economy is that that gift carries an obligation to return something, to reciprocate. Does anyone have any examples in mind of cases where you've seen an open source developer express this sense that they're owed something for their code that they shared? Any examples? FFmpeg. I told you I didn't want to plant you in the audience. Vlad gave a talk at FOSDEM yesterday and used this example of FFmpeg. Anybody familiar with this? FFmpeg is the video encoder, and there was a tweet. Let me see. I'll go ahead and read this. Woo, sorry. Yeah, somebody tweeted, FFmpeg has created more enterprise value than we can fathom. Does anybody remember this? And then FFmpeg quote tweeted it and said, yes, and we receive essentially no support from these enterprises relative to the value we provide. Okay. Is FFmpeg on tide lift? Lewis? Okay. Probably could be. Yeah, so, but that's an example of a producer of software, the authors of FFmpeg, publishers of FFmpeg, kind of expressing this, in that statement, there's this sense of, a word I would introduce is resentment, this sort of like imbalance, or this expectation, okay? This expectation that, hey, I'm providing all this software, you're making tons of money off of it, YouTube or whoever, I think there was the one with Rumble or whatever, right? Where's the return? Where's the reciprocation, okay? So we've got open source projects on the one hand, we've got companies using open source to great effect on the other hand, and there's this sense in the community, and FFmpeg is an example, of an obligation or an expectation of reciprocation. That's not the only expectation in the ecosystem. David Heinemeier Hansen has, he did a keynote, I think it's 2021, and in there he says, let me read this one to you. The title of the talk that he published was, I won't let you pay me for my open source, okay? And he says, he's talking about the MIT license, and he says, it's the language of giving without expecting anything in return. It's the language of sincere charity, a charity without strings attached, neither commercial nor reciprocal, okay? So I guess that's kind of two brief examples of differences in expectations within the open source community. On the one hand, we have producers that do feel this sense that they haven't been reciprocated properly for the gift that they've given, but then there is also this voice that says, hey, that's not why I'm here. I'm here for the pure gift. I don't want to burden you with something, and I don't want to be burdened with something, okay? So this is where I say, insofar as open source is a gift economy, meaning that there is or should be, to some extent, an obligation associated with the gift of publishing open source, it's a bad gift economy because we have mismatched expectations. There isn't a consistent expectation across the community about what the obligation is, but there's definitely this groundswell of sentiment that, certainly when you see the cases of the giant corporations and the XZs or whatever, then, there's a mismatch there. There's an expectation. So, this is a short talk. The main thing is to get this conversation started, to start to express these opinions, talk about it as a gift economy, think this through. There's really three fundamental ways that companies do participate in open source and could be seen as reciprocating for this gift. Number one is by giving their own code back to the open source community. There was a wonderful report that GitHub and Linux Foundation did with the group from Harvard the end of last year on open source funding. The result they reported is that 86% of the value that companies give to the open source ecosystem is in the form of labor, is in the form of their employees contributing to open source projects, okay? So that's one major way that companies reciprocate for the gift of open source, is through more open source. Number two is gifts in kind. So things like Fastly donating bandwidth to PyPI, I think it is, right? This kind of gifts in kind. Sentry, we donate credits for our SaaS to open source projects. The third way that companies can reciprocate for the gift of open source is paying cash to maintainers. That's what this open source pledge is about that we launched in October. And the idea there is to try and come up with a norm. Our norm is $2,000 per developer on staff to the open source projects of your choosing. That's kind of what we've thrown out there. We've got 30 companies on board. Collectively, those companies, we've given $2.5 million to open source in the past year. So we're thinking about that as kind of, we're tracking ARR for the pledge. But yeah, again, this is trying to think about open source as a gift economy, getting organized about it. So pledge in the cash realm. But then, there is this question about how do we think about the contributions that companies are making in terms of developer time. There we can look at things like Drupal. They have a wonderful contribution tracking system. So companies get credit for the contributions that their employees make to Drupal, and that has marketing benefits for the companies in the Drupal community. Another spicy one here is WordPress with the 5 for the Future program, right? Which is about, again, tracking developer time to the project. Another aspect of gift economy is the antagonism. When you look at the literature of kind of how this model was first theorized, there's this antagonistic element, and certainly we see that most clearly, with Matt Mullenweg's campaign against WP Engine, as a cancer on the ecosystem, right? So we certainly see that's probably a clearer example than FFmpeg of this sense that there's an obligation to reciprocate. I got 30 seconds. How are we feeling? Is this an interesting thing to keep talking about after this? Yeah, cool. All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you coming out.